This is Newsmax TV. I'm Ashley Martella. We're joined here in our studio by the founder and the president of the Center for Security Policy in Washington, Frank Gaffney. He served in the administration of President Ronald Reagan as Assistant Secretary of Defense for International Security Policy. Mr. Gaffney is also a renowned book author, a columnist for the Washington Times, National Review Online, and a Newsmax contributor. Welcome back to Newsmax, Frank.
It's great to be with you, Ashley. Thanks for having me.
This nuclear arms summit in Washington, did anything positive come out of it in your opinion?
You know, in a way, I think something positive did come, in the sense that between the nuclear posture review that was unveiled last week and the START follow-on treaty that was signed last week and then this nuclear security summit this week, we've had a focus put on the whole question of nuclear deterrence that has been largely absent from certainly public consciousness, and I would argue even informed official deliberation. Well, basically since 1992, when we stopped testing nuclear weapons, with the notable exception of the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty, when we really had a very concentrated debate as to whether it was advisable for the United States permanently to forego testing its nuclear deterrent. And I'm happy to say that when that last focus occurred, a majority of the United States Senate, 51 senators, voted to reject a comprehensive test ban treaty. Now it's back as part of this larger effort by President Obama to engage in what I really call the unilateral denuclearization of the United States.
That's the START treaty?
Well, it's the nuclear posture review, it's the START treaty, it's the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty. It's more generally his fixation, really, going back to when he was a radical student at Columbia University to rid the world of nuclear weapons. And the truth of the matter is, and this is what I hope will come out of this happy focus on this issue for the first time in years, is the only country Barack Obama can denuclearize is ours.
Obama failed to get China to go along with sanctions against Iran for its nuclear weapons program. Are you surprised?
Well, I'm sure that were President Obama sitting in this studio, and presumably you'd be happier if he were than I am, he would say, well, listen, actually, we think we're making progress bringing China around. They've agreed to have a conversation about this at the United Nations. We think that they're signaling a growing willingness to consider sanctions that will be meaningful on Iran. I don't believe there will be meaningful sanctions on Iran with Chinese support, and without them there won't be, of course, any sanctions. And I'm not surprised that this is playing out the way it has, because China regards Iran as a client. It is a very important source of energy for the Chinese, and the Chinese are helping it with its various military activities and I think its regional ambitions. And so for all these reasons, no matter how many times the President of the United States says we're making progress towards sanctions and we think we're bringing the Chinese along, I don't believe the Chinese think it is in their interest to penalize their client, and as a result, I don't think they'll do it.
U.S. has just announced that Iran will have a nuclear weapon within 1 year. Others have given different timetables. What's yours?
I have no idea, and frankly, nobody else does either. They have been beavering away at a nuclear weapon for at least 20 years. And the thing I keep thinking about is, it took the United States 3 years to invent the idea of nuclear weapons, to develop all of the capacity to build them, and to use one or two of them specifically, to military ends.
Manhattan Project.
The Manhattan Project, and then ultimately its use at the end of World War II. We had no knowledge of the science. We had no access to advanced computers. We had none of the kind of technical abilities that are currently available worldwide. Having said all that, it's taken the Iranians 17 more years to get to this point than it took us to get to it. I've got to believe that it could be any day, if not maybe a month or two. Certainly, I would be surprised if it's as long as a year.
All right, some suggest that Iran getting a nuclear bomb is inevitable and we should just prepare for another Cold War scenario. What do you think of that idea?
I think the idea of containing Iran, based on our success in containing the Soviet Union, is wrong on two counts. First, I don't think containment was all that successful vis-a-vis the Soviet Union. What really changed the game, what ultimately resulted in their defeat in the Cold War and the elimination of the Soviet Union, of course, was not containment. It was Ronald Reagan's strategy of rolling them back, of actually bringing down the USSR. Containment against a country, or at least a regime, that it's not clear can be deterred, if only because the regime is convinced, according to its theology, that bringing back the 12th Imam, the Mahdi, as they call him, a sort of Messiah figure, is their highest purpose. And in order to do that, according to their religious beliefs, something very like the apocalypse needs to take place. It seems to me it is the height of folly to believe you'll be able to dissuade them from pursuing that end, perhaps by starting a nuclear war, in the way that we did successfully deter the Soviets from engaging in nuclear war against us until such time as we were able to bring them down.
What blowback would there be, Frank, from a U.S. strike on Iran if one ever happened?
The Iranians have clearly tried to indicate that there will be very severe repercussions, perhaps even globally, from any attack against the regime. They've threatened to close the Strait of Hormuz, through which much of the world's oil flows. They have warned that they will turn loose their various terrorist allies and that they will strike wherever they can against the interests of those who are responsible. They, of course, will have ballistic missiles with which to do that as well. They are certainly pursuing other non-conventional forms of warfare. I wouldn't be surprised at all if they don't have biological agents that might be used for this purpose. So it is not without risk, that's for sure. And the question that policymakers here have to wrestle with, and for that matter in Israel and elsewhere have to wrestle with, is what are the risks of destroying, hopefully not just the nuclear program of Iran, but the regime that is pursuing it, versus the risks of allowing nuclear weapons to come into the hands of such folks. Because I'm certain that the latter will be an extremely perilous situation for freedom.
There's continued concern over Pakistan's nuclear arsenal in their proximity to al-Qaeda locations. Now, the government of Pakistan insists these weapons are secure. How big of a threat is that in your estimation?
Well, I think that the biggest problem with respect to nuclear weapons in Pakistan is not probably al-Qaeda so much as it is the Taliban. And the Taliban, of course, have been given to a considerable degree, particularly the Afghan Taliban, support by some of the key elements of the Pakistani security establishment, notably the intelligence services. So you're talking about a country that has within its own system people who are sympathetic to the Taliban, have been enabling the Taliban, and who may even feel a greater loyalty to the Taliban than to the government of the moment.
Danger of the Taliban getting their hands on
I
these
think
nuclear
there is a
weapons?
real danger of the Taliban getting their hands on these nuclear weapons. There's a danger, for that matter, of the Taliban getting their hands on the government of Pakistan writ large. But at the very least, we cannot have confidence that the Pakistani intelligence services, known as the ISI, and probably at least some elements of the army as well, don't have divided loyalties. And if that's the case, we may even have seemingly secure nuclear facilities and control arrangements in Pakistan compromised by folks whose sympathies ultimately lie with the Taliban and their ambitions.
All right, one final question. Attorney General Eric Holder says confessed 9/11 mastermind Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and his co-conspirators could still be tried in a New York City civilian court. What does that tell you about the Obama administration's view of terrorism and terrorists?
Well, the first thing it tells you is that Eric Holder is fatuous and probably disqualified as a practical matter for being the Attorney General of the United States. As they say in New York, this idea, forget about it. It isn't going to happen. Charles Schumer, the senior senator from New York, apparently immediately responded to this statement by Eric Holder saying, they know it's not going to happen in the Obama administration, so they should just say so already. My feeling about it is this: putting an enemy combatant, an unlawful enemy combatant like Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and 4 of his co-conspirators in the worst terrorist attack on the United States inside a civilian court within spitting distance of the target that they destroyed is, I think, scandalous. All I can say is Eric Holder, I think, has completely discredited himself, certainly within the eyes of the American people, and I suspect most of their elected representatives in Washington as well.
Frank Gaffney, always a pleasure to see you. Thanks so much for sharing your expertise with us here at Newsmax.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching Newsmax TV.